Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we have my December wrap-up. So December. I really hoped that I would have, I don't know why, like I just had this idea that I was going to read a ton of books, and I did read a lot. I read 14 books, but it's not as much as I have read in November. Anyway, it's still a good number, and also like numbers don't matter, so that's fine. So I read pretty much, they were all romance books, and I mean, you know, what else is new? But so I have a lot of like half-star ratings, but so when I talk about the books, I'm going to go into if it was a 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, and all that other stuff. But just for star ratings on Goodreads, I usually tend to round them up. So if I give a book a 3.5, I rate it as a 4, because I feel like that's more fair to the author, since Goodreads doesn't do half ratings. So I have 2 3-star books, 5 4-star books, and 7 5-star books. So I'm really happy to see that I had so many 5-star books. That's always just, that's such a good thing to see, that I'm doing a better job of picking books that I'm going to enjoy. I do feel like sometimes I pick books mostly just because I'm curious about them, not necessarily because I'm going to love them, and so we're going to see that play out in just a minute. So we're going to go ahead and start with my 3-star reads first, and then we'll work my way up to the 5-star. So we're going to do 3-star, 4-star, then 5 stars, ending with my highest rated books of the month. Also, I will say that almost all of these books I talked about in detail during Vlogmas, but if you're not a vlog watcher, I'm still going to talk a little bit about them here. But if you want my real in-depth thoughts, in the moment reaction, you can check out the Vlogmas videos. There's usually a picture of the book I was reading at that time, or maybe it was even in the title. So, the first book that I want to talk about is The Bride by Julie Garwood. This is a historical romance. This is an old school historical romance, and this was my first Julie Garwood that I had ever read. I was very excited about reading this book, and I immediately saw right away the appeal of Julie Garwood. She has a very readable writing style that gets you really into her story right away, and I really love that. I feel like it can be kind of common when reading older authors that they have definitely an older style of writing that is a little unapproachable for modern readers. When you're used to reading something by a writer today, that older writing style can be hard to get into, and I didn't feel like Julie Garwood had that problem at all. Like, I was instantly into the world, captivated, wanted to keep reading, wanted to know what was going to happen, and I really enjoyed that about her writing. This book follows Alec and Jamie. Alec is a Scottish laird, and he is basically like the highest, the most important, the big Scottish laird, and he is coming to England to the Baron to find a bride, and he has, it's like a deal that they have, and he has picked out Jamie, who is the youngest daughter of this Baron. Jamie, he's instantly taken with her because of how much like spirit and fire that she has, and how she kind of opposes him at times too, just with her opinion, and he decides that he's going to take her for a wife. Now, the interesting thing about Alec is that this book starts out with a little bit of a mystery where Alec's first wife had died, and it's hinted at that Alec was kind of responsible for that. So I was really interested to see how that mystery was going to play out for the rest of the book. Unfortunately, I feel like it really wasn't as developed as I was hoping it would be. It was like the opening scene, and it was this thread of what might happen, that there would be this bigger mystery aspect, but it really didn't evolve into much. I really also did enjoy Jamie's character. I felt like she was a very fun character. She was very feisty. She was very strong. I really, really liked her a lot. I liked how she was like, had some healer aspects to her. I loved her relationship with the stable master in the beginning. She was a really fun character. The reason that I decided to give this 3 stars is because I really wasn't a fan of their romance. I had a hard time getting behind Alec. He was definitely a typical old school historical romance hero in that he was pretty misogynistic, talked a lot about owning Jamie, and for me personally, that's something that's really hard for me to get behind and really root for a romance when I don't love the hero like that. And I'm not saying, like, it was hard for me to write this book because I don't want to hold it up to the standards for what I would say for a 2021-2020 romance novel being written, and that we know we do prioritize women's choices and we want heroes who respect that. So I wasn't saying that it should have been written like that. My rating of 3 stars was purely on, I don't enjoy this type of hero, and I I really had a hard time getting behind their romance. I definitely felt like the plot was fine, you know, the whole story was good, it was fine. I loved Julie Garwood's writing, and I'm really interested to read more from her. I definitely want to pick up The Secret, because I know a lot of people have loved that for sure. But this one was just kind of, it was okay. It wasn't anything that would go down as a favorite. It wasn't bad at all. It was just not for me. Okay, and the next book that I have to talk about, oh boy, is Untouchable by Sam Mariano. Now this is a dark romance, and it is very dark, and it has a abundance of trigger warnings. And even when I first opened the book on Kindle, there's this full page manifesto from the author warning you away and telling you what's going to be in here and enter at your own risk, you know? So, as has been said before, when an author does that right at the beginning, you know exactly what they're hunting, right? This is going to be dark, it's really going to be uncomfortable, it's going to really, really go to some ugly places that maybe would be hard for a lot of readers. So I will say the biggest warning with this book, I would say, is that it has an abundance of non-consensual sex between the hero and the heroine. Like, that is a big deal with this book. It is pretty much constant non-con in the book. Not constant. It does grow and develop. But anyway, so I do enjoy dark romance. I am very specific about the type of dark romance that I like and what I'm looking for in a dark romance. And one of the biggest things that I look for in a dark romance is I want to see the character's motivation, and I want to see what led them to this point. I want to have an understanding of why they're acting like they are and how that affects their relationship and the choices and the actions that they are making right now. So that was really why I was reading this, is because I had heard a lot about it. It had showed up on two of my friends' best books of the year, Jen from the Book Refuge and Jesson from Jesson Reads Romance, and that really, really intrigued me, and I wanted to see what they were liking about this book so much. So I'm going to go over the plot really quickly. The plot follows Carter, who is basically king of the school. He's the high school football star. He's just like the big dog. And then we have Zoe, who is the heroine, and she is not king of the, you know, she's not really on anybody's social agenda other than the book starts out when she has kind of been, I guess, groped basically by another guy on the football team, and she calls him out for that. She tells the principal, and he gets punished for that, so he can't play football, and it's like a really big deal, and all of those cool kids basically come along and really make her life miserable. They bully her, they do some things that are pretty awful to her, and that's how we lead up to the moment in the beginning scene where Carter and Zoe first meet. And I gave this book 3 stars, but really I feel like it's probably more of a 2.5 star for me. I mean, I honestly have really, really thought a lot about what I think about this book and what I want to say about this book, because I just honestly didn't really enjoy reading this book a whole lot. And that's not necessarily because of the dark themes that it has, right? I knew what I was getting into when I read this, and I knew it was going to be in there. The thing that I specifically didn't enjoy about this was I really felt like this is set in high school, and these characters just really didn't feel like high school age kids to me at all. And they definitely have a very mature outlook on life, and they definitely have a very, like Zoe especially. I really liked Zoe, but I also really kind of felt like her character was a little bit unrealistic, only because she definitely had this breadth of understanding and this really sort of, she almost had like an analytical mind where she was doing the diagnosing of Carter and maybe the potential psychiatric issues that he may have had, and just the way that she responded to him, just and all of the things in her life, it just seemed like it was a little bit, she was a little bit outaged, right? And so I definitely felt like the high school setting in this was very much a plot device. I think personally it would have worked just as well if they had been in college, because honestly, this type of situation I'm sure would happen in college dorms with different types of sororities and fraternities and things like that. I could definitely see this happening there, and I think it would have worked better if it had been, because another issue that I had with this is that you really didn't have any parental involvement. Zoe's parents were pretty much checked out and basically encouraging her to go and spend time with this football star. So you really didn't have that boundary of a parent there to make this necessary in a high school setting. I also feel like okay, this is going to be a long clip about me talking about this book. I didn't vlog when I read this book. Vlogmas was over, and I really wanted to have a chance to talk about it, so here we go. So I was really on board with this book for the first probably half. I went into this really reading this as if it were a psychological thriller. And that's really how it feels when you're following Zoe and how she's thinking about Carter. Like, there are a few moments when they're together and alone, and it feels very much like a psychological thriller, like she's afraid to be alone with him and what's he gonna do and things like that. And I found that to be super interesting, and I really, really liked that a lot. After about the halfway point, when they were both kind of trying to figure out how to have any type of a relationship with one another, and in a way that they could both live with, because Carter is absolutely very dominant and takes what he wants without any regard to Zoe's feelings. And Zoe, for her part, you know, she wasn't necessarily objecting to that all of the time. So it was really interesting to watch their dynamic, because you could tell, especially, that Carter was starting to really develop feelings for Zoe, and Zoe had the same as well. And so it was really this really interesting dynamic in their relationship where they were both wanting to be together, but they had a lot of, like, damage between them and a lot of still wanting to have, like, Zoe kind of still wanted to have her autonomy, but through the course of the book you could tell that she was definitely more giving and allowing Carter to just take what he wanted. So it was, the first half of the book was really pretty interesting as far as that goes. And then they had another plot device about halfway through, something that would force them to be apart or force them to make some change to the relationship and the arrangement that they had agreed upon. And that took up a long part of the book, and at that point there was that spark of the psychology of Carter was gone, so I really wasn't interested in what's he going to do or how's he going to figure this out. So that part just ended up basically as a reason for the author to find ways for them to be together physically and have this dangerous, dark, physical relationship. And it just took up so much time that I just was honestly bored, and I was really pushing myself to read it at that point. But then we get to the last third of the book and things really picked up from there, and we had that more interesting part of their relationship for me. What I found most interesting was, how are they going to make this relationship work? And does Zoe want this? And what's Carter going to do if she doesn't want this? Like, that was the part that was really interesting for me. And I will say that I did enjoy their happily ever after too. I liked seeing them work it out and find happiness together, because that was something else that really made me give this book a 3-star, is that I really was sympathetic to Carter. Sam Mariano did an excellent job of really making you sympathize with this villain. He is a complete villain. He's not a villain turned good guy. He's a villain from page 1 to the end. He's a villainous character. And I love books where writers can get you on board with the villain, where you can understand why they're behaving the way they are, and you kind of root for them, you know? So I feel like that part right there was really why I gave this book 3 stars, because that was so impressive to me. I love writers who can make you really on board with that villain. Like, that is just, I love that so much. It's such a favorite thing for me. And I did also really like their romance towards the end. It was just really super interesting. But again, like, that middle part of the book, it just seemed like it was a lot of just a plot device, a way to have extra drama for them to be together and for him to, you know, like, I just didn't care for that a lot. I felt like it was boring, honestly, and I just didn't care, honestly. So that is my very long review of Untouchable. I felt like this is absolutely, I would say, even if you like dark romance, I would say proceed with caution with this book, because it definitely pushes the envelope with dark topics. Like, this is not an easy book to read, you know, but it was also pretty interesting for me to read about it too. But if you love dark romance, you would probably like this, because Carter is definitely an alpha dominant character who has some pretty messed up things that happened in his life. That was another thing. Okay, I'm going to talk about that for a minute too. So it's mentioned early on, there's this scene where Zoe says, she's just talking about how he is and how he's acting and how he feels like he can just take things from anyone and with no repercussions, you know? And Carter mentions, I'm not a sociopath. I wasn't born like this. This is a result of things that happened. And that interested me so much because I really wanted to get his backstory and see why. I really wanted to see the why he was behaving the way he was. So when we did get that reveal, it was really only just mentioned, and that was it. And I just, like, I just kind of wanted a little bit more. I felt like he was such an interesting character, and he was so fascinating watching his motivations and why he did the things that he did, that I was hoping for a little bit more talk about that instead of just having it mentioned and then it was never brought up again, you know? So I will say that I can definitely see the appeal of Carter. He's a really, honestly, a very, I don't want to say likable, because again, he's a villain, but if you like villains, like, he's a hero that you could get behind, I think, for sure. He's truly fascinating, and there were definitely some moments in there that showed, like, he really loved Zoe, and he really wanted her, and that was another thing that I really loved about this book, was that whole aspect of taming the wolf, and she is the only one that can tame him. Like, I'm a sucker for that. So I still stand by my 3-star rating. It was really, honestly, a very interesting book, and I did really love the parts of their romance that I got. There was just that big middle portion that wasn't very fun for me to read. It was pretty boring, if I'm being totally honest, but there were so many good parts of this too that I think it was a worthwhile read. Alright, the next book that I have is My Fake Rake by Ava Leigh. This was our December pick. This was our December pick for the Rake Appreciation Society. This is a historical romance. This book was very fun and very cute. This follows Grace and Sebastian. They are both very intellectual type of people who are sort of like scientists. Like, I can't remember if it's herpetology or the study of bugs, which I can't remember what that word is right now, but they both like study the natural world, and they're both very intellectual. And Grace is in a situation where her father is dying and he wants her to marry before he passes away. And so there is this very well-known, well-respected scientific man who comes into town, and she thinks he's going to be the perfect man for her to marry, but he doesn't really have an interest in her. So her and Sebastian devise this plot where Sebastian sort of becomes this rake, the fake rake, right? He becomes this really wonderful playboy who suddenly shows Grace attention, and she believes that if that happens, then this other guy who she hopes will propose will then be interested in her too. I really liked this book. I thought it was super cute and super fun. I do have, I kind of wanted the ending to be a little different than it was, but I definitely feel like if you like that type of intellectual hero and heroine with sort of a gender swapped, or not really a gender, like a male makeover type of thing, like, you would really like this, because it was very fun, it was very cute. The first half was super funny, they had a lot of great conversation, and it was a fun time. Okay, and the next 4-star book that I have is Deal with the Elf King by Elsa Eliskova. This was a gift to me from Shay Geeks Out. We did a buddy read with this together, and I honestly really quite enjoyed this book. I really love fantasy romance, honestly, and this one I think was pretty well done. I think that this is actually maybe shelved as a YA fantasy romance. So this book follows Luella, who is a human, and in this world you have like the human world that's sort of bordered by the elf world. And every so often, I can't remember exactly how many years in between, the elf king comes to the human world to choose a human queen to bring back to their world to sort of keep the magic going so that their community, their ground, their world doesn't die. So Luella is a healer in the human world, and she has always had like this affinity with the earth and being able to heal things, but she's never really thought that she had any type of magic that might enable her to be that queen. Well, suddenly there hasn't been a human queen that has been like taken to the elf world, so the elves come to the human world to pick one, and it is Eldest, the elf king, who comes to choose the human queen, and as soon as he sees Luella, he realizes that she is the one who has the magic that can help his world heal, and he takes her back to the elf world to be his bride. I really honestly enjoyed this. This had a really slow, beautiful, very lovely, very quiet type of fantasy setting that kind of reminded me of Radiance by Grace Draven. It gave me those same type of feels. Eldis he's not a cruel king at all. Like, he's a very sort of cold and hard at first, but not cruel or angry or anything like that, and Luella kind of works to build a relationship with him and to get him to trust her, and they end up developing a love for one another that was really slow building and beautiful to watch. This is definitely a PG romance, fade to black, and so that's why I feel like it's probably not an adult romance. But if you are looking for an adult romance that has a really slow, beautiful love story that builds over time with this really soft and interesting, beautiful fantasy world, I would definitely recommend this because I really found that it was enjoyable. I felt like it had a lot of elements that I look for in fantasy romance, and it was really a good read. Okay, and the next book that I have to read is How the Duke Stole Christmas. This is a Christmas anthology, historical romance with some of my favorite writers. We have stories in here by Tessa Dare, Sarah MacLean, Joanna Shoup, and Sophie Jordan. I talked about this in some of my last Vlogmas videos because this was the last book I read right before Christmas. And I feel like this is such a fun, very Christmassy anthology. Like, I honestly really enjoyed every story in here. I gave Tessa's story 4 stars, Sarah MacLean's 3.5 stars, Sophie's story 3 stars, and Joanna Shoup's was 4.5, almost 5 stars. Joanna Shoup's story in here was absolutely my favorite. That was really a fun play on How the Duke Stole Christmas because it was set in New York, so it was a Gilded Age historical romance, but his name was Duke, like he wasn't a duke like the other stories were. Tessa's story was also one that I really loved. And Sophie's story was about like a Scot. That was kind of a fun setting too. Sarah's story I really liked, but it was also a little bit more melancholy and dark and angsty than I was really hoping for, and I would have loved to have seen that developed into a full book because it was a good time. I really liked this. I think this would be a super fun read for anyone at Christmas time, but especially if you like historical romance. Alright, and the next book that I read that was 4 stars is Kiss of a Demon King by Cressley Cole. Carrying on with my read-through of Immortals After Dark series. I don't even remember which book in the series this is, maybe 8, 9, I don't know. But this book was really fantastic. This follows Sabine, who is hands down one of my favorite female characters that I have read in 2020. She is a sorceress, I think she's a sorceress, and she is very old and very, very intelligent and very smart, but she's also like a little bit vulnerable in here, and I really loved seeing her vulnerability sort of juxtaposed with her strength. I thought it was super, super interesting, and I loved her so much. And the hero in this is Rydstrom, who is a demon, and they have a very unique and very complicated relationship that is very much driven by their physical attraction to one another. And Sabine definitely has a plot in place to try and make sure that she gets Rydstrom and gets to have his baby. And it was honestly, like, this book was almost a 5-star. It was so freaking good. It was just a good time. I love the Immortals After Dark, and this was honestly a highlight of the series for me. Alright, and the next book that I have to read that was 4 stars is The Winter King by C.L. Wilson. This is another fantasy romance. I read this as part of the Smart Women Read Romance. I'm a patron of theirs. They have a monthly book that you can read if you're a patron, and then they have a private sort of live chat where you discuss it, and I really wanted to take part in that. Also, this book has been on my radar for so long, and I was super excited to get to read it. So I gave this book 4 stars. This book is a really interesting and for sort of mellow fantasy world. Like, I definitely wouldn't say this is a high fantasy setting. It sort of feels very relatable, with really the only magic being the weather magic that they have. So you have the Winter King, and then she is the daughter of the Summer King. So we have Winter, who is the Winter King, and Kamzan is a daughter of the Summer King, and she is sort of like his least favorite daughter. Like, she has really been treated terribly by her father and kind of wants to get away from them, but she also has a really powerful storm magic that is kind of, I think, scares her father a little bit. So Winter comes to the Summerly Kingdom to take one of the Summer King's daughters to be his wife, to sort of make up for the fact that the Summer King's son killed Winter's brother, and that will hopefully broker a peace treaty between their kingdoms. I honestly loved the first half of this book. I felt like the first probably 60% of this was just really so great. I loved the characters, I loved the magic system. I felt like the weather magic was really interesting and unique, and it wasn't something that I had read pretty much. I don't think I've ever read really very many books that have to do with weather magic, and I really liked that. It was a very atmospheric read too. I feel like this is perfect to read in the winter time. Once we reached the halfway point, it definitely started to slow down. There were some battle scenes that were kind of lengthy, and I kind of got a little bit bored. But it picked up again at the end, and I really liked the way that this plot was all wrapped up. I do think that there were some plot points in this that when they were revealed, they were pretty obvious. They were telegraphed pretty early on, but that really didn't bother me too much because I was kind of swept up in the story, to be quite honest. I really enjoyed it. I felt like Camden was a very strong female character. I really liked her a lot. I liked her interaction with Winter and the way that they sort of slowly had this marriage that grew from something that was really kind of just totally a marriage of convenience with some animosity towards one another that then grew into something that was kind of admiration and respect, and then at the very end it turned to love. I do feel like that there wasn't quite enough emphasis on the romance in this for my taste. I felt like it could have had a lot more focus on the romance and less focus on maybe like the battles. I did feel like the fantasy world also wasn't super well developed, but it also wasn't anything that made me feel like it was unrealistic. So overall, I feel like if you like fantasy romance, I think that this is worth a try to see how you feel about it, because honestly, it was a solid 4-star read for me. I did enjoy a lot of it. There were some parts that I didn't, but I would recommend this for fantasy romance readers for sure. Alright, and now we're moving into my 5-star reads, and one of those is A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Milla Vane. This book was fantastic. I gushed about this a lot in my favorite romances of 2020, if you've watched that video. I gushed about this a lot in several of the Vlogmas videos too. I was just completely swept up in this, and honestly just my mind was blown at how amazing this book is. This book is honestly deserving of all 5 stars. This was nearly a perfect blend of fantasy and romance. Honestly, I feel like this is without a doubt the best fantasy romance that I have ever read, quite honestly. The fantasy world was very well developed, it was very well thought out, it was so clever and it was so immersive, and the romance in this was given equal weight, and that's something that I always sort of judge my fantasy romance books on, is like, is it an equal blend of fantasy and romance, or does it sort of lean heavily one or the other? And I felt like this one was a perfect blend of both fantasy and romance. Like, it was just honestly so freaking fantastic. Honestly, I feel like I've talked about this book so much. It was just really honestly incredible. It was such a completely immersive and powerful reading experience. For me, the first 100 pages were really sort of difficult to get into because it is a very dense fantasy. I've heard some people say that it is info dumpy, and I would very strongly disagree. There is zero info dumping happening here. You're not just thrown the information of the fantasy world, you're shown it through character actions and character interactions. But that means that when you're shown that, it's a little bit of a slower moving pace because nothing is happening right off the bat to really throw you into that fantasy world. It was just such a completely beautiful and well done fantasy romance that I just cannot stop thinking about it. I want to reread it. I feel like this book would also benefit from rereading it because it's just so in-depth, and I feel like the political aspect of the worlds and how they're built up, like I feel like you may miss a lot of that if you don't either read it slowly or maybe reread it, or maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I really loved watching Maddox just really slowly fall for Yvonne and watch how he loved how her inner strength was something that just drew him and he was just so in awe of. And Yvonne is such an interesting character because she's so physically weak and damaged and mind-blowing, and it was just a freaking delight, honestly. Alright, the next 5-star book that I have is The Prince of Broadway by Joanna Shupe. I absolutely love this book. This is the second book in her Uptown Girls trilogy, and it was so freaking good. I loved it so much. This book follows Florence, who is the middle daughter of a very wealthy man. She is definitely an uptown girl, but she's also sort of chafing under that restraint, and she really wants to seek her own independence and to build her own life, and she doesn't want to just marry because that's what's expected of her and what her father is pressuring her to do. So she decides to go and find this man named Clayton, who is the owner of the most successful casino in New York. She goes to find him one night and she asks him if he will give her lessons on how to run a casino successfully, because it's her plan to open a casino for women, just for women. Clayton is sort of instantly taken with her and is not really interested in doing that, but he does agree at the same time, just because he's so sort of overwhelmed with this woman. So they begin the process of learn these lessons on how to run a casino. And honestly, this book was just so much, just everything that I want in a romance book. It was so wonderful watching Clayton really just sort of slowly fall for her and honor her independence and her agency and her choice. And I specifically love how that was such a main theme of this book, how he loved her and wanted her to be happy for whatever choices that she made, and they weren't choices that he was trying to force on her. This book was fantastic. Loved it so much. And the next book that I read that was 5 stars is The Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean. This book was my favorite book of 2020. I read this book in one day and completely fell in love with it. It is honestly just one of my favorite books of all time. This book follows Serafina and Mal. Mal is a duke, and Serafina is a young woman who wasn't really looking to fall in love with the Duke, but sort of did. The very cool thing about this book is that we start in this book when Serafina and Mal have been married, and then, but they're sort of like estranged from one another. So Serafina shows up to, I think is it Parliament? I can't remember the political aspect of it. She shows up at Parliament where Mal is there, and she wants a divorce. So then we go back in time to when they were first meeting, and their first meeting in this book was just so completely adorable, and just, I loved it so much. And then it sort of jumps back and forth in time periods about how they first met and how they fell in love and the problems that happened with their marriage that led them to the point where she would want a divorce, which at the time was never really given to women, and so she went to go and ask him specifically for that. And then we end up just moving on from the book at that point of the plot, and Mal decides that he wants to try and win Serafina back, but he asks her to help him find a replacement for her so he can have a Duchess, and then he will give her a divorce. And one of the things that I loved about this book so much, again, was just Mal was just the perfect hero. By the end of this, he loved her so dearly, and you could just totally see that I loved that this was a second chance romance too, and I loved watching them try to come to terms with the hurt that they had in their relationship and still try and find happiness because of it. I love this book so much. This was honestly just a perfect historical romance and one of my favorite books ever. And the next book that I gave 5 stars is Demon from the Dark by Kresley Cole. This is another book in the Immortals After Dark series, and this book follows Malcolm and Cadro, I believe. Caro. Names, I tell you, they're not my strong suit. This book follows Malcolm and Caro. Malcolm is a Veman. So Caro is there on Torture Island to try and bring Malcolm down, and watching the two of these people fall in love despite all of the baggage that they have and all of just the things that they have as being these immortal creatures and still wanting and loving one another. And Malcolm is one of my favorite heroes in the whole Immortals After Dark series because he is just a completely beautiful alpha mellow male, and I loved him so much. And I loved that they have a language barrier in here where they can't speak the same language. It was just, this book was so good. This is one of my favorites of the series. I feel like this one for me is right behind Conrad and Naomi's story. That one is honestly probably my favorite, and then this one. Alright, and the next 5-star read that I have is Don't Hex and Drive by Juliet Cross. This book was so freaking much fun. I love this series so much, and I in particularly loved this story, which follows Isadora and Devraj. Isadora is one of the Savoy sisters, and she is, on the back it says she's notoriously bad at peopling. She sort of doesn't really do a great job at being around people, but she loves her plants, and she's like a healer type of magic, and she helps things grow and helps things heal, and her and Devraj have this chance meeting right at the beginning that is kind of adorable and hilarious all at once. Devraj is a vampire who has come to the town to try and solve this mystery of why these young women are going missing, and he's a very powerful, old, specific type of vampire that was pretty interesting too, and they both have this really powerful attraction to one another, but Isadora is definitely fighting that, and Devraj is really so smitten with her and just slowly but surely wants to win her, and then realizes his feelings go much more than just a surface level, and it was just so much fun. I loved it so much. I can't recommend this series enough. It's so fun. It's such a just complete delight to read. I just love and adore them. And the next book that I have is the Midwinter Mail Order Bride by Katie Wilde. This book was so much fun. I was really on a fantasy romance kick after I read several that I really enjoyed, and I just wanted to keep finding more. And this one was honestly just so much fun. It was really short. I think it was only like a 2.5-hour read on your Kindle. And this book is basically about Princess Anya, who offers herself to be the bride to Kale the Barbarian, who recently conquered this kingdom. Princess Anya's plan is to marry Kale, kill him, and then take her kingdom for herself. But on their first meeting, Kale sort of rejects her because he believes that she doesn't really want to be with him, like his feelings got hurt, and he wants a woman who wants to be with him, who isn't just doing it because it's her duty. But Anya is sort of like hurt and offended by that because he rejected her, so they go on this journey to go back to Anya's land to rescue her parents from some evil that has fallen on her land. So it's a little bit of a road trip journey too, and I just love this so much. It was so much fun. It was honestly pretty witty and pretty humorous, and their love story was just so cute and sweet, and Kale was a peak alpha male, and I just loved it. It was a ton of fun. And the last book that I have to talk about is The Royal Conquest by Stacey Reid. This one was also a 5-star read for me. This is another short little novella. It was so enjoyable from beginning to end. It was very unique for a historical romance. It really had some really unique aspects to it that I super enjoyed. It was very fast-paced. It was just a freaking delight the whole way through. So this book follows Peyton, who has recently been rejected by a lord who she believed loved her, and he sort of spurned her and left her aside and decided he's not going to marry her. She ends up having a chance meeting one night with Mikhail, what's his last name? It's a Russian last name. Konstantinovich, who is she believes to be just a Russian commoner who is a horse trainer. They meet in a stables and have a very great first meeting, and they're so instantly taken with each other when they first meet one another. Mikhail, and specifically, is super drawn to Peyton. She sort of arouses these feelings in him that he thought that he wasn't capable of feeling anymore. You know, attraction and lust and desire. He has a very dark past that isn't really touched upon too much in the book, but it's the thing that is basically holding him back from being with her as much as he would like, because he is not able to really be intimate with women except for in a very specific way, in a way that he feels is not fitting to a lady of Peyton's stature. So Peyton, once she was sort of spurned by the Lord, she decides that she's not going to marry a man with a title, even though her parents think otherwise, so she thinks that Mikhail is perfect, but little does she know that he's actually a Russian prince. So this book was just so much fun. It was so completely addicting from the moment I first read it. It was a very short read, and it was really a great introduction to Stacey Reid's writing. This was my first book from her, and I super, super enjoyed it. So, alright, hopefully this video isn't too long. I feel like I rambled for a very long time. Thank you so much for watching this, and I hope I will get to see you in my next video.